So we have created our bird sighting functionality where you can tap on a cell and you can confirm that you have seen a bird. Now we want to perform a couple of refactors where we'll change the way our code operates but keep the same functionality. Before we do that, I want to go ahead and make a commit so that we can back up to a working state if we run into any issues while we're doing the refactoring. So I check the status of my code right here. Git status. Okay, those are the files that I want to see changed. So I'm going to say that what we've done here is we have allow guests to confirm sighting a bird by tapping a cell. And let's shorten that to guests can, bird watchers can. I try to find a more specific term for the person who's going to be using my application than user. Okay, so I like that. And I don't have any uncommitted changes. Great. So here's the first thing we're going to do. First of all, we now set the bird on the cell, and then we go and we set all of these attributes from the bird on the cell as well. That seems redundant, and it is a little bit. Once the bird cell has the bird, it has all the information that it needs in order to be able to set up its view. Additionally, it seems like, if possible, we want the cell to be responsible for all of the cell-related display operations. And right now, the view controller is taking care of all of that. Wherever possible, I do try to move logic out of view controllers because they act as the central hub for all of the operations and can very quickly get bloated with a lot of code. So what we're going to do is move the responsibility for these three things into our cell itself. So I'm going to cut these three lines. Now, all that we set on a bird cell is a bird. And from now on, if we want to make changes to the way that that cell displays attributes from the bird, we'll change that in the bird cell, and the table view controller will remain the same as far as this method is concerned. So here's bird cell, and here's the attribute that we set, called bird. Now we're going to use a feature of Swift that allows us to make changes each time an attribute on a class gets set. So I'm going to add brackets here, and then I'm going to invoke didSet. Inside of didSet, I can put code that will run anytime that bird gets assigned. So I'm going to paste the code in there that I cut from the table view controller. Next, I'm going to change every reference to cell to self, because now we are in the class that owns the bird name label and the bird description label. So I'll replace these. And then finally, over here, current bird isn't the name of a variable inside of this class. So instead, we're going to be going with bird. And because bird is optional, we'll need to do the optional chaining that we demoed in the previous video. We see that in the fix command that we receive when we try to use bird without that optional chaining. Okay, so we'll do that here and here. Now, we ran into two separate error messages with this particular line in the last video, and now I would like to explain those in a little bit more detail. So optional chaining works here and here, but optional chaining doesn't appear to work in our ternary operator. That's because in this particular case, we're taking an optional class or an optional instance of a class, and we are calling a Boolean value on it. If that value is true, then we're supposed to do one thing, and if that value is false, then we're supposed to do another thing. The problem is that if the optional value isn't there and it's not possible to get a hold of that Boolean value, then we don't know which of these two things to do. That's why Swift insists that we force unwrap this and guarantee that it's going to be able to get that Boolean, or our other option is to set a default right here to say get confirmed citing, or if you don't have access to that Boolean, set a default of false. So this is another thing that we could do. I think that this gets confusing a little bit quick. And so what I'll tend to do in this case is go ahead and do the force unwrap for now, like we did in the last video, and then think about what it really means for a bird to be nil. So if we have a bird cell and there's no bird, it doesn't really make sense for that cell to exist or operate. We have no use for a bird cell without a bird. And so for that reason, I'm relatively confident force unwrapping a bird in this situation. It may even make sense to make the bird not optional. Now, with views that are instantiated by iOS, that can be a tough thing to do, because if I just make it not optional like this, I'm going to get an error that says bird cell has no initializers. That's because bird cell, just like any class in Swift, is a class that expects to be able to be instantiated with anything that it is required to have. So what it's saying here is we have an attribute that's not optional, a bird, and we have no initializer that guarantees that a bird is going to be provided by having a non-optional attribute where you have to pass in a bird. Because iOS instantiates this class for us, we would instead therefore have to force unwrap this, set it after it's instantiated, and hope that it's there anytime that we call it. That also happens to be what we do with the views that we represent as attributes on classes that are instantiated by iOS. For now, though, I'm going to leave this an optional. That's a choice that we can come back to later on. So let me return to my birdless view controller for a second. Now our self-heroic index path method looks a little bit cleaner. We've still got some messiness happening down here, though. We optional chain on this bird situation multiple times, and I think this might look a little cleaner if we just make sure that the cell and the bird are both there before we start doing any of those operations. It turns out that this operation that we do right here to ensure that an optional value is available and also can be cast as a bird cell can be extended to cover multiple conditions before we start doing something. So in this case, I wouldn't have to do this optional chaining if I knew for a fact that the bird was there. So I will add to the end of this if let cell equals self.tableview.self_row@index_path as bird cell, comma, I like to open a new line, although you don't have to do this. Let confirmed bird equal cell dot bird. Okay, so here's what that does. This condition has access to the value declared in an earlier condition. So this is saying, assuming I'm able to get a cell, and that cell can be cast to a bird cell, set it to a variable called cell. And then, assuming that that cell variable that we just created has a bird which we can assign to confirmed bird, then move forward with what's in this block. And at that point, both cell and confirmed bird are available to us within the scope. Instead of doing cell.bird question mark here, we can now do confirmed bird. There are two naming conventions with regard to optionals. One of them is to name something while it's still an optional maybe thing. So if it's an optional thing, then you would name it maybe thing. And then when you performed an operation like this, you would say thing. And so it would look like this. So suppose we would have named, instead of naming the cell's attribute bird, we would have named it maybe bird. And then this one, where it's confirmed, would be called bird. So this is one naming convention for optionals. The other naming convention for optionals is to call this just bird, and then to call the one that we know isn't nil confirmed bird. I don't have a preference between these two, but some people have a really strong preference. You can decide for yourself if there's one or the other that you like more. So now we have confirmed bird dot confirmed sighting equals true. And then we have cell.accessory type equals confirmed bird dot confirmed sighting. And then we ternarily set that to a check marker to none. Finally, when I have multiple conditions like this, I tend to put them like this. So I'll have my if, let blah blah blah, let blah blah blah, and then I'll put this down here. I know it's a little bit funny looking, but it makes it extremely clear, first of all, that there are multiple conditions here. Second of all, how many of them there are, in this case, 2. And then third of all, of course, what they are. Once again, matter of preference, but that's the way that I like to do it. So let's go ahead and run this again just to make sure that everything is working. Check. Scroll down. Nothing else has been checked. That all looks good. So now let's amend our commit. All right, so these are the files that I've added. Or the files that I've changed. I'm going to add those, and then I'm going to do git commit dash dash amend. This is going to add the files that I currently have staged to the previous commit that I've already made. And when I hit enter, Git's going to give me the opportunity to change the commit message if I want to. I'm currently in a VI window, so I would hit I to go into insert mode, and then I could change this commit message if I wished. I think the commit message still makes sense, so I'm going to get out of insert mode with escape, and then I'm going to get out of the window WQ for write quit. Save what I have and take me out of here. Beautiful.